got it.
Well, welcome to everyone. It's the second in our series, Meet the Trustees, and it's an opportunity for you to get to know who's at the heart of the Christians and Media family. And if you missed the first one, we spoke to Toby Rachel Akinbadi, who joined us, I think it was in July 2021. And I'm joined today by someone who joined on the same day, Mr. Paul Kerensa. Welcome to you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for the welcome. Yes, both here and in the last few months.
Well, some of you may know Paul, may have seen him in your churches, but for those who haven't met Paul before, it's a good chance to get to know him, get to know the person behind the day job as well. But before we get to who Paul really is, let's have a chat with Paul about his day job. Paul, if I remember going back to the 1970s, perhaps earlier, when the passports, you could put on your passport your job title. What would you put on your passport right now?
It's a very good question. Well, when you said we're looking forward to finding out about who Paul is, I thought I'm looking forward to finding out who Paul is as well, because I don't currently know. And speaking, going back to the 70s, I think of the children's TV show Mr. Ben, and that is me. He used to try on a different hat every episode and try a different job every episode. And certainly the pandemic has shifted that for me. So in the old days, if you'd asked me a couple of years ago, I would say I'm a comedian and a writer. And then increasingly that was becoming comedian / writer / broadcaster. And really each of those was occupying about a third of my time. So I couldn't even say I'm a comedian who does a bit of writing or whatever. It was all pretty evenly balanced. Since the pandemic, obviously the stand-up comedy has been tricky to do when venues have been closed. So I think I went from 3 gigs a week to 3 gigs a year, and 2 of those were in a car park. And so yeah, then I've been doing some writing teaching online for my own writing course that I run. And then I've just started, in fact, tomorrow I start a new job as a university lecturer, lecturing in screenwriting. So I'm pivoting, I think it's fair to say. So they're all related. It's all about telling stories. It's mostly about fun or comedy or entertainment. Yeah, and a little bit of and some religion media in there thrown in as well, because I do the Pause for Thought on Radio 2 breakfast show and some cover presenting on my local radio on Sunday breakfast. So anything that tells those stories and tells God's story in a great different way.
I imagine that some of the people have heard your voice on radio too. So they think, oh, we know that voice. It's familiar. I was just thinking, you said you got this new job in university. Do we call you Professor Paul Kerensa now?
Yeah, that is. I was going to say at the very introduction. You know, I'm shocked you didn't have the letters after my name. But
that's true.
Yeah, people normally tackle things after my name, but that's a whole different thing. That's a different thing.
You mentioned about the pandemic, and it obviously changed the way you do things. I imagine you had to be a little bit creative and innovative during that time. So what were you trying to do? I know that 1 or 2 things I did see online you were trying to do, but can you just share with the people who are watching this the types of things you had to explore?
Yeah, trying to do is exactly the right term, because it's I think, as many of us were, you know, you try and translate things online, and some things work better than others. So I would say the writing writing course I've moved online has worked very well, because people are in their homes, they're in their writing, the places they do their writing, and that sort of translates pretty well to a Zoom event. Live stand-up is tricky, and I have done many. In fact, I've done more online Zoom type gigs in the last year than I have done in-person gigs, probably. It's coming back now, of course, but that's tricky, because you've got you know, sometimes a church or a venue would ask me, can we book you for a Zoom gig or an online gig, or we had you booked for an in-person gig, can we move it online? And then of course your questions start to become, okay, yes, but is it live or pre-recorded? Because I've done both online, so you've put the camera there and film yourself doing a show and upload it, or you do it live. Is it YouTube live, Facebook live? Because then there's interactive comments. So the audience at home, you can't see them, but they can put their heckles in the chat, or ha, 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 whatever it might be. So I did Spring Harvest and as a YouTube live last year. I did New Wine as a pre-recorded comedy show this year. But then you get Zoom gigs where you can see your audience, but you can't hear them because they're muted. And so this odd evolution, I suppose, happened where a lot of secular mainstream comedy gigs that went on to Zoom had this thing where you'd have an audience of maybe 50 or 100 people watching on Zoom, but you'd have a front row, which is 5 or 6 people you've selected to unmute so they can laugh on behalf of the audience. Because if you had 100 people laughing, it would wreck Zoom, you know, but you can have 3 or 4 as long as the doorbell doesn't go and the dog doesn't bark. So It's very odd. We're all adapting, and I'm glad, of course, that we are, able to meet in person a bit more now. But yeah, you have to just try these things, and at the same time, try and be funny, which is often tricky when you're not feeling that funny, But it's been a strange season.
I know. I think it's been a strange season for many, many people. But as you were sharing that, I was just thinking it must be so difficult to try and make people laugh on Zoom. It must be very difficult. I know you've worked with a number of fairly well-known people. I was just wondering if you wanted to share some names, just so people could connect with some of the things you have done in the past.
Yeah, you sort of never want to name drop, but at the same time, you're just waiting for someone to give you the chance to name drop. So thank you for that. So I've written Miranda, the sitcom Miranda, with the person Miranda Hart. Worked on that with her. Had a cameo as a customer in series 3. That was nice. Lee Mack, I've worked on his sitcom Not Going Out for the last 15 years or so. I worked with Chris Evans on the Radio 2 Breakfast Show, and then moved to TV with him for TFI Friday and Top Gear, which meant I got to work with Matt LeBlanc quite closely. One of the producers from that show then went to BBC Music, and so I worked on Michael Bublé's BBC special, Bublé at the BBC. So I worked very closely with him, which was marvelous, because I just love his music. And this wonderful moment where we're doing the tech rehearsal, and his big band are there, and Michael's there doing his sound test, but he wants to rest his voice. He says, "I'm just going to go and lie down. Can someone else stand in?" Of course, I'm at the back going, "Yeah, I'll be Michael Bublé. I know the songs. I'll do it all when we practice the tunes." But I was too late, and I was eating a sandwich, and someone else put their hand up first. So I will always regret that sandwich. It's my most regrettable sandwich. But jobs like that, you end up thinking. I started out as a comedy writer, and I still am a comedy writer. I write for sitcoms and gagging up other people's work, script editing, that sort of thing. And then because of those links and those connections, the Bublé show was hosted by Claudia Winkleman. And so my job on that, for a large part of it, was in the studio. The producer would say, "Oh, we need another 5-second link for Claudia to introduce Michael's next song. Can you write something? You're the writer." And I go, "Do you want a joke in there?" And they go, "Well, I haven't got time for a joke. Just introduce the song." I go, "Okay, how about, here's Michael with another song? Brilliant. Put that on the auto cue. Let's go." And you're doing that going, why am I'm a comedy writer. How am I doing this? Why am I doing this? It's very odd. But every job I've had in the media really has been pretty much getting to know the right people, being nice, hopefully being available, being ready to go. It's that thing, opportunity being where preparation and luck sort of meet. So, whether having that script in the back pocket, having the toolbox of skills hopefully good to go. So when someone says, "Do you want to come and work on this thing?" you just go, "Yeah." If it's the right job, then go for it. Even if it's, I would never have dreamt or predicted or planned that I'd work on things like that. And that was then. And since I've been doing more books and things like that as well, and radio and podcasts. And yeah, so in this media game, I am jack of all trades, master of none, but quite happy with the various different roles that you get to take.
Sounds like you have to take the opportunities when they're presented, don't you? Really, and that's your day job. That's what you do during the day and in the evening as well. Let's get to know a little bit about Paul. And Paul, my question to all our trustees is, when did you sort of discover God? Have you had a faith all your life, or was there a moment at which you said, "No, I'm following Christ"?
Yeah, well, I grew up in my parents weren't particularly Christian, I would say, or religious, maybe, but they weren't churchy people, but they were. So they were village people. They weren't the village people. They didn't have sing YMCA and dress up as policemen and etc. cowboys. But it was a village life. It was like, I born in Cornwall but moved to Surrey, and it was, the village of Dibley in the county of Midsummer, essentially, for those familiar with the TV shows. So it was 6 pubs and a church. That was the village, and the church was, a hub of the village. So my parents would send my brother and I to the choir. We were in the Cubs, and then the Scouts and the Pathfinders and the Sunday school. Anything to get rid of us, basically. It was all free childcare, as far as I can gather. But and then I came back going, "Oh, it's good stuff, this church. I think I get the story. I understand who this Jesus was and is." And I think my parents were probably thinking, "Well, that wasn't the idea, but okay, fair enough." So in that sense, I sort of found my own way, I guess. And as a teenager, I did one of these summer camp things, Pathfinder Cypher, I think it was, where you'd go away with a bunch of teenagers and have a week of fun, but also learn more about God. And And I did the same summer camp for about 4 years in a row as a teenager. So it was like a really slow alpha course, 1 week a year, asking those questions. And 1 year would be about prayer, or 1 year would be about the chronology of Jesus' life, or the disciples, or whatever it might be. So I was coming away going, yeah, I kind of get this. So I became a Christian really by the side of a river in Birmingham on one of those canal boat holidays, a canal, not a river. And I thought, this is for me. I get this, and I think this is something I want to look into more, and start this relationship rather than just a head thing. And I did a theology degree to delve into it further, and I'm still on that journey. I suppose I'm still asking the questions, puzzling it all out, and it's a great, fun, joyous, frustrating, marvelous philosophical quest to be on.
I think it was Steve Chalk said, our relationship with God is one big conversation, which I think is fair enough. We have questions, we have doubts sometimes, but it doesn't challenge our faith. It just enhances our faith, quite honestly. I'm not sure if many of our sort of people watching this knew that you had a theology degree. There are not many comedians or stand-up comedians who have a theology degree, which I'm sure you're unique.
Well, there are a few. But there aren't many. But I know it goes to show which way you can go, because I did theology. It wasn't a vocational theology degree. My New Testament lecturer was a staunch, not just atheist, but anti-theist. And so we're learning New Testament theology from this guy who's going, and this is why it's wrong. And so my faith sort of survived that. But I know Katie Brand, for example, who's a comedian and a comedy actress, and she did a theology degree, but started it, as a teenager. She was quite an evangelical Christian and came out as an atheist. So after the degree, but she's still, I think, she's asking the questions. She loves talking about religion, and I think it makes you question, it makes you puzzle, it makes you ponder, it makes you look at the universe in a fun, different way, I think, and it makes you keep asking those questions. Because I still think that a vast majority of people in the Western world just don't ask those questions and haven't really even thought about it. So I suppose that's partly why things like the pause for thought and some of the those chances we get to probe those questions in a secular or mainstream media way, I think, can be really helpful, just to give people those nudges, just to say it's worth asking these questions and considering these things.
Absolutely. I'm sure the people watching this wonder how many Christians are in media, and there's quite a few Christians in media, isn't there? Even at the BBC, dare I say, there's a lot of Christians. I think with what you're sharing with us today, what would you say are the challenges for a Christian in the line of work you're in?
Well, I think there are many and various, but partly because there are many various different roles in media and different jobs and departments, and it is quite nebulous. I think just the very concept of an industry of media nowadays. Once I remember, when I started out and worked lots with the BBC. I've never actually been an official employee. I've been a freelancer throughout, so I've never had an office there or much of a place of work. But once TV Centre sort of closed, and then you had the comedy department, which was there right next to news, next to children's, whatever, and now suddenly the comedy department was way across London there, and let alone last year when suddenly people are working from home. So this idea of a hub and a base applies for some in the media, but not everyone. So I find that is often a challenge, that I need to find my tribe and find my people, and part of that is, I think, Christians in media. Certainly when I started out, I was a Christian in the media, but I didn't know any Christians in media. And partly thanks to groups like Christians in Media, I've said the word Christians in Media far too many times in one sentence there. It was great. I remember distinctly going along and meeting walking through the doors of one event and going, I don't know any other Christians in media. I think there was a vicar on TV once. I think I've heard of Richard Coles, and this was back then. And Harry Seacombe, no, I think he's no longer with us. It was like that, and you suddenly go, oh, right, there are many. In fact, there are dozens, if there are hundreds, but they're behind the scenes. And so you don't get to know the producers, the writers. But then working on Miranda, for example, the sitcom, James Carey is a Christian and was working on that as a comedy writer. Paul Powell, Christian comedy writer on Miranda. Miranda herself, Sally Phillips. The list goes on, and at one of the recordings, I got one of the guest actors there was a Christian, and someone introduced us, went, oh, by the Paul, but you can talk, you're both churchy people, you can talk now, but you often need that introduction because we don't wear badges saying we're Christians in the media. So it's often tricky enough to find out what job someone has in the media. You're working on a big production, you bump into someone, you go, I've no idea. Are you the boss of, do you own this entire studio, or are you making the tea, or both? And if you can't work out what your place is and what the roles are, it's often tricky to find out someone's fate as well. But so chances like this, and the group that we're in here and looking after, is a great opportunity, I think, for people to realize that actually there are more of us out there than you might think.
You mentioned James Carey, and James Carey is a great friend and supporter of Christians in Media. So there are lots of people who are in the media scene, behind the scenes, who actually are part of Christians in Media in some way, part of the family, which is really encouraging. I suppose one question which some people might ask you, Paul, is that as a stand-up comedian, for example, how do you reconcile that with being a Christian? Because we all know that some comedians can be a little bit near the mark, but what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, on stage, I'm filthy. I'm terrible. 18 plus. I'm awful. I'm an awful. No, the thing is that some comedians are, and many aren't. And increasingly, I think nowadays we've moved away from, in part, some of the laddish stand-up comedy things that in the 90s and the noughties. I just think about if you'd asked my mum 10 years ago, name me a comedian, she might say Billy Connolly, maybe Eddie Izzard at a push. But nowadays, she'll call me up and say, "Oh, I saw that David Mitchell on TV. I quite like him. I prefer Dave Gorman, but I quite like a bit of Lucy Porter." And she could name you 50 comedians probably now. It's become, I think really since TV discovered or rediscovered how to put stand up on the TV, because it used to be a late night. When I started, it was like midnight on a Saturday. The BBC stand-up show was it, and it was late night, and it was just edgy kind of. That was the only version there was. Nowadays, of course, Michael McIntyre, Live at the Apollo, Mock the Week, suddenly it's like a machine. Suddenly it's an industry, and you get comedians starting now with 5-year plans saying, well, year 1, open spots, year 2, Edinburgh, year 3, Mock the Week, year 4, O2 Arena Tour. And, everyone of my generation started with no real plan. So it's become a bit more mainstream, I think. And it goes to show, therefore, I'm seeing lots of old comedians when I started, who've always been quite sweary, actually say backstage at gigs, I'm finding, I heard one the other day say, I can't, my swearing stuff's not really working anymore. People don't want it as edgy and as rude as they used to. The audiences themselves, their sensibilities are changing. And I think, people, especially after a pandemic as well, and even before that, it's been a tough few years, with recessions and all sorts of things. People want cheering up, and that's really what it comes down to. They want a good night of fun. And I've been at the bar at the very back of a gig where audiences, I've seen people walking out of shows because the act on stage is just being going too far, and I think a lot of comedians think they have to go to extremes to get laughs. And actually, you look at Tim Vine and Milton Jones, both Christians, both inspirations of mine, certainly, that just says you can just be funny, and that's okay. You can just tell jokes, and people love jokes.
It's interesting that, because I was just thinking that, here we are in media, you're a stand-up comedian, and churches have often over the years sort of had this attitude towards media, for example. It's not quite the devil, but the relation between church and media has often been a little bit hairy. And you're also a comedian. I was wondering how churches are reacting to you now, in not just your role as a comedian, but also coming into Christians and Media, what your thoughts are about that as well. But I'm just wondering what the perception and reaction to you from churches.
Yeah, well, I do a lot of going around churches doing my stand-up show, doing alpha launches, and just church comedy night, especially at Christmas as well. Do a show called Comedy and Carols, and and all of those things are really, some churches put them on to say this is the start of our alpha course, but many of them put them on to just say we're here for the community, doors are open. We're a church, we have church service on a Sunday, but look, on a Friday night, here's a thing, come on in, just get to know us. And those are great and they're lovely. But I do find I have to spend the first couple of minutes, and I learned this the hard way. You have to sort of go, oh yeah, they do need 2 minutes at the start to be reminded that it's going to be okay, to be reassured. And I find that I say it out loud. I just say, look, let's be fair. There are churchgoers here who are thinking, oh dear, it's comedy. I hope he's not going to be rude. But there are people they've dragged here who aren't churchgoers who are thinking, oh, it's a church. I hope he's not going to be too twee. And that Venn diagram, there's that middle bit where it just goes to show that you can be funny, you can do comedy, you can have fun and laughter, And I think it's odd that we have this, as Christians, joy is meant to be, we're meant to be joyful people. It's the heart of so much of the biblical teaching is, yes, there's lament and all sorts of things, but there's also great joy. And we look at, we've got a happy ending in our story, so we should be celebrating that. And yet the stereotype of, maybe some churchgoers are these joyless people. Well, many are, but no, not all of us. And no, we all have our moments, but the institute, as soon as you have an institution, I guess, of a church, it was that sense of we have to be serious here, and that's the sort of tradition. But the churches I go to, they're great fun, and but sometimes you need to be reminded and reassured, like it's okay to laugh. We can have fun here. It's going to be okay. But in terms of then church and media, I always think I just wish the two spoke more often to each other, and they'd see that they're quite alike. Because there are people in the church. I've been to church events where they've talked about, how far is too far in the media, or the media is a sinful, dark, evil place, and that sort of thing. You think actually, I don't think it is. That's a stereotype that you may have of it. But equally in the media, people who are, religiously illiterate, I think, can look at the church and think, oh, look at those Christians, those church people. They're all, this, that, the other. And, especially when in the media, many who work in journalism or news or even not that, but the stuff that they see is, what the historical abuses and things like which are how absolutely terrible. And every time that sort of thing happens, it breaks my heart, because I think that's it's certainly, of course, for the victims and those who've been through those things. But I'm sorry to get very deep and heavy here suddenly, but it's the work then that needs to be done to rebuild the reputation of Christians in the church, because so many people latch onto those things and think, oh well, that's religion there, that's all religion. And the church and the media are both, I think, too often looking at each other, pointing fingers, throwing stones, and actually, we're generally both big institutions, whether Church of England, BBC, or the many other denominations and broadcasters as well. But we are so often just trying our best to be good people, telling good stories, lifting people, elevating people, and trying to be there at the heart of communities as well as nationally. So there's so many great things and I know great people working in both the church and the media. And I think we've got more in common than I think a lot of people think.
I think you're right. I think it has improved over the years. I think there's great advances in my church, for example, is incredibly media savvy, actually. But you hit the nail on the head about being better storytellers. I think that's what we are developing that, but we still got a long way to go. And I hope that Christians and media can help churches engage positively with their local, their regional, and national media, and actually how to use the social media as well. So I think that's a role which we do have. I was thinking that we just started a mentoring program for 18 to 25-year-olds who are considering entering media or on the first rung of their media career. What sort of advice would you give that group of people?
Yeah, I think it is a different industry than when I started, certainly. But even then, I've been going for about 20 years now in, I suppose, the media aura version of it. But you have that imposter syndrome, and in 20 years, I'm there thinking I'm still on the fringes. I'm freelancing, I'm working from home, I'm doing bits and pieces. I've been doing more children's writing, for example, children's CBBC type things in the last year, but I'm just starting on that. I've always been on the fringes of the sitcom. I've not been at the center of anything, but that's okay, and actually I think as soon as you set out on these paths to work in the media, imposter syndrome will always creep in. You'll always feel like I don't really belong here, I'm not too sure. So if you can find those tribes, which I think is why Christians and media is a great one, for example, but finding those people, those connections, I think can be really, really helpful, because it's so easy to, I think, and with more of us working from home, it's so easy to feel alone in this industry. Even if you're working as part of a team or part of a company, if you have a full-time job maybe with a company, but it's so easy to feel isolated from that. So I would say finding those connections, and also retaining that integrity. I know that's one of the big issues that we're talking a lot about at Christians and Media at the minute, because if you're dealing with journalism or non-fiction in some way, a documentary, then you want to be true to the subject matter, telling those stories, being, exhibiting a sense of godliness, and we try. We always fall short, but we try, I think, to wear those clothes well, and yeah, just try our best to be honest, to to the storytelling and to the people involved, especially when there are people involved who are, you know, if they're true stories. But I mean, all story. One of the things we do when I do the writing teaching, and I know other people have spoken to this as well, is that, you know, all stories really are stories. There's hope built into all of them. The fact that you can watch a fiction, watch a drama, and you know the baddies are going to get their comeuppance, you know that the goodies are going to win through against all odds and that sort of thing. And it's the Christian story writ large, really. So we are in the business of broadcasting hope, and you know, whether it's a Christian radio station, whether it's secular mainstream fiction TV writing, we are telling stories that help get people get through things. So long may that continue.
You mentioned integrity, which is going to be something we might touch upon in a minute, but I think it's being about authentic, isn't it? You know, just being real before God, because we've all fallen short, as you rightly said. It's not about pretending to be something we're not. And what I've picked up from this group of people who are part of our mentoring program, one, they're incredibly passionate about the Lord. Secondly, they're incredibly creative, you know, and I'm learning from them every single day. So I think it works both ways about the mentoring. I think I'm being mentored by them, which I think is a great encouragement. I think the next generation is really going to bring something really, really different, I think, to the media landscape. Well, I'm hoping that anyway.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also, particularly in the last year or so, you know, now as soon as when churches had to close, you know, the buildings had to close, and we moved online, suddenly you've got people who are ministers now becoming broadcasters, you know. And the church was down the road, and yet I wasn't able to go there, but I turned on YouTube, clicked the link, cast it to my TV, and yes, suddenly my vicar became a broadcaster, you know. And but therefore there are skills involved with presentation, which of course many ministers already have, the technical side of things. So, you know, people who were previously doing the sound at the back of church are now suddenly working at how to, you know, essentially broadcast, really. And obviously, although we're now coming back to in-person events, I think we're going to be clinging to some of those online things in a hybrid way. And many of those skills, it just means that people are now making short films for their churches, really, and things like that. So, the church media thing, I think it goes both ways. Christians in the media land, in the mainstream secular media, but also people in churches, I think, realizing that actually this media thing is something we can all engage with a bit more.
Absolutely true. And I know you're part of the Christians and Media family. You're at the heart of us, you know, going forward. What are your hopes and dreams, Paul, for Christians and Media?
Well, it's tricky to say without knowing quite what the landscape's going to look like in the next, you know, I was going to say 5 years, 6 weeks. I don't know. It's tricky to plan ahead of it, isn't it? So I would love to see more. I'd love to see more connections and more members. Just really, I know that there are untapped. There are people out there who are Christians, who are in the media, who aren't part of Christians and Media, who maybe don't know it exists, or who do but think I don't dare put my head above the parapet, which I fully get. I know that some people just think it's good that they put themselves out there, but I don't know how, if as soon as I, you know, out myself as a Christian in media, people will ask me questions, and suddenly there's articles and things, and I fully get that. So I pray and hope for that they would still find a way to engage with us, even, you know, anonymously if need be, because I think it can be a real help and support. It's a great network of people. And also for those who are maybe Christians who aren't in media yet but want to be, I hope that we can show that the media is not a scary landscape, that actually it can be a great, powerful thing, and that actually we probably need their skills and we need them to join us. So we need them, you know, people who think, oh, I think I could do the media stuff, but I'm not sure about this whole scary media world, you know, then let's reshape it from within. Let's do that. We can do that.
I think you're right. I think, as you know, we just started planning for 2022. We're having discussions about that now, and I know you're going to be part of that in a big way. But what in the short term is actually on the calendar for Paul Kerensa?
Well, Kerensa, well, apart from the Christians and Media events, such as the Day of Prayer, the service we have online as well, of course, those things are coming up as well, or will have come up, depending on when this video lands, will have been coming up. It's very tricky to work your tenses out when you're not quite sure of these things. What else? I'm doing more. I'm doing the teaching, the university teaching, half a day a week. I'm doing more of my writing workshop. I'm writing for Not Going Out. We've got the last episode we're just writing now. My other main project I've been doing, my lockdown project, was working on the history of broadcasting, history of British broadcasting, and the history of the BBC. So while I haven't got, I should have all of my books on the bookcase behind me. I've got board games there, but if you could see just here, I've got 30 books, lovely, beautiful old books on the origin story of the BBC. And I want to just show you one, if I may, because this just arrived, and it's got a little crossover with what we're talking about. So excuse my T-shirt as I grab this. This is a beautiful old book. Look at this one here. The Churches and the British Broadcasting Corporation, 1922 to 1956. Lovely, beautiful and battered, by Kenneth Wolfe. The Politics of Broadcast Religion. So I haven't started that one yet, but trust me, once I've got through this, there's going to be, we will see how, and I do a podcast called The British Broadcasting Century, where we're looking into what we can learn really from broadcasting's last 100 years and take it forward. So obviously the religious broadcasting landscape is rather different from the one in the 20s to 50s, but I think the messages are still there. We still have this wonderful opportunity. Technology, art and science is really how they saw broadcasting when it first started, coming together with a bit of magic. And I think that's what we've got. We've got this powerful tool of broadcast media, and we've got a great story to tell. So we can keep on telling it.
Great. I think not many people know that when Lord Reith set up BBC way back in the Yonder, he set it up with a very strong Christian ethos. It may have slipped away from that, but it certainly started like that. So BBC got that history, which I'm sure you're very well aware of. But Paul, we could go on forever. We could chat about lots of things, including gardening or whatever.
This will be the first. This will be the first 24-hour Christians and Media interview. We're just going to keep going.
It's a rolling one. It doesn't stop. Yeah, no, I get someone else in as I fall over.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you, Paul. We're really looking forward to you being part of the Trustees Board, part of the Christians and Media family over the next 2-3 years, and helping to shape what it's going to look like to help support, encourage, and inspire Christians who work in and with media. So thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you for having us. Looking forward. Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Okay, God bless.